Yes, thank you very much. Once again, my name is Chad Novak. I'm here on behalf of the Saskatchewan Taxpayers Advocacy Group, along with, as a taxpayer, a dedicated taxpayer of this beautiful city of ours in Regina, Saskatchewan, Canada. I want to first start out today by saying that I was actually quite pleased to see this recommendation come before Council today, or Executive Committee today, until I started reading the details. And I am fully in support of the Housing First strategy that exists out in several other municipalities across the world. I think that it's a very, very proactive solution in terms of getting people the help that they need, getting them off the streets, getting them the social good that happens with providing housing to them. I think that it's a very great opportunity we have as a city to show the world that we're not only along the lines of some of the most advanced cities in the world, but also taking that one next step. The unfortunate part is, when I'm reading the details of the recommendation before you today, there are some serious concerns in terms of how this is actually intended to be addressed. I note that Regina has received $1.1 million each year since 1999, or at least over the last 5 years. But the program has been in effect since 1999, and it continues to go forward into 2019, which I'm very pleased to see the federal government come on board in that sense, because it's we keep hearing from the City of Regina that we're upset that the federal government isn't doing their part. Well, I'm sorry, but in my mind, this is a perfect example that they have been doing their part. It's just how those funds have been managed is the question. When I'm reading through the documents today, there's some serious concerns in terms of, we're basically saying that let's continue doing what we've already done. Let's continue supporting other levels of government, but let's not actually do anything, because you know what? It's not our requirement. I beg to differ on that. It is your requirement. You represent elected, or you are elected by taxpayers, and you represent them. Whether they make $1, whether they make $1 billion, whether they're homeless, whether they have a mansion. You need to remember, those individuals are the ones that pay your salaries. Those are the members, those are the citizens that also decide whether or not to elect you again in 2016. This is an important strategy that I fully support. I was grateful to be at the housing, I call it the true housing summit, as opposed to what the city decides to put on, because it actually represented some interesting strategies that the Carmichael Outreach had put out there, North Central Community Association, along with the YMCA, which I understand the YMCA is part of your organization here, the committee, so to speak. And it was proudly hosted by the Queen City Tenants Association, which honestly I don't know very much about. All I know is that I'm glad to see someone willing to stand up for tenants. We see far too much catering to property owners and landlords by our elected officials and our city administration. But I have yet to hear a single thing in terms of actually supporting tenants. A great example is this per-door grant program that we have that offers money to developers with no strings attached. We put trust in the developers to create affordable housing. We put trust in them to give the housing to those that are most affected by our housing crisis in the city that has been self-created. But actions speak far louder than words. And to date, if we're looking at this, we've had this program in place since 1999. Our housing crisis has been disgusting over the last 5 years. Our homelessness issue has got even worse. There was supposedly a homeless strategy developed in, I think, in 2000 or 2003. Great job, because where are we at right now? We've got more homeless on the street, and we're too scared to actually do the counts, which I see today that you're actually looking to have the YMCA do the counts for you. I applaud you on that. City of Regina needs to step up to the plate and take more of an active approach in this sense. Some more information that I'm reading in here, a lot of what is talking in here from the federal government, and I'd like to have some clarification on this. The federal government says to receive the funds, the Homelessness Partnering Strategy requires communities to develop a local plan on homelessness under the direction of a community advisory board. Now, I'm curious to see, do we have one yet? If we don't, what is our steps in terms of when will that be developed? What are the actual action plans that we hope to implement with that? Another serious question is, why is this issue coming here to Executive Committee and not to the Mayor's Housing Commission? I would think that this is about the most important issue that a Housing Commission would focus on if they're supposedly focusing on solving our housing crisis and affordable housing, which is its own made in Regina definition here, where it's at or below market value or something to that effect, where CMHC and every other municipality in all of the world has a different view. This concerns me. Reading further, the federal government does not, it demands that there is a 40% of the funds that are going towards Housing First by March 31st, 2016. But it says that the funds can also be used to invest in other proven approaches that complement and advance Housing First and measurably reduce homelessness, as well as funds can be used to support non-Housing First clients, such as those at imminent risk of homelessness. This is an extremely subjective statement, and there is no measurement that I'm sure the federal government has placed in terms of actually measuring this. I would love to see if the federal government has a guideline in this. I would expect you as elected officials to know this, and our city administration for sure. If there is, what exactly are the reports that go back to the federal government to show that their $1.1 million is actually being used effectively and not just squandered in terms of overhead or consulting costs or whatever else you feel that technically can be counted towards supporting the homelessness, inclusive of your $15,000 gift to developers. More statements in here are talking about basically, and I see why now. At first I was kind of surprised at why the City of Regina was so happy to see this Housing First program. But then I realized, what is Housing First focusing on? Creating more housing. Now, in those documents, it even talks about the fact that there is no requirements from the City of Regina to those developers to actually put it towards people that are in these situations. There's no requirements. We're not tying any strings to this. We're saying, you know what, here's funding, go have fun, please help us out, but you don't have to. To me, this is an utterly ridiculous situation that we're in. We've created this problem. Let's fix this problem. We cannot keep saying that this is a federal government issue or a provincial government issue, and when the federal government does step in with this $1.1 million for every year, we say, well, you know what, you could have given us more money. You could have helped us with the affordable housing.
Mr. Novak, you have 1 minute.
Actually, I believe I have 3 minutes left. Is it 10 minutes still?
It's 10 minutes.
Yeah,
1 minute.
and I've been actually timing myself, so I noted last time that you guys cut me off quite early.
I'll give you 1 more minute, Mr. Novak.
3 minutes. Thank you. We're talking about the reason why Housing First is so attractive to this council and our city administration, noting that we have realtors and people that are associated with the development industry, is the fact that it's giving money to developers. Enough of this corporate handouts. Enough of this favors for our developers. We're sick and tired of this as taxpayers. Stop focusing on corporate. Start focusing on individuals. Give individuals the helping hand that they desperately need. Don't just shut them out. Like, this is a social responsibility, and whether or not you think that it's in your jurisdiction or not, you have the power here. You're given this money, hands or with no strings attached. Start actually being accountable to the individual taxpayers and give them a hand up in life. They deserve it. Thank you, and I'll answer any questions you probably don't have.
Thank you, Mr. Novak. Any questions from council? Thank you very much.
Not surprised. Thank you.
EX 14-9, read recommendation 1, that council endorse the principle of homelessness partnering strategy in Housing First by continuing to complement the work of the federal government through existing city programs. 2, that the administration continue to provide regular updates, including any financial implications, to the Mayor's Housing Commission and Council on the homelessness partnering strategy, Housing First, and other homelessness issues. 3, that item E1418 be removed from the list of outstanding items for the Executive Committee, and that this report be forwarded to the March 24, 2014 meeting of City Council. Do I have a mover for the motion? Thank you very much. Councillor Young, seconder. The Mayor, thank you very much. Discussion.
I'd like to speak to, if I might, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Councillor Young, for moving the report. This is an important report for Council. Members will know, having read the report, that the federal government is putting $5.5 million over the next 5 years, or $1.1 million a year, for homelessness and the Housing First strategy. It's important to note that this is not a City of Regina control of this capital. It actually is the federal government. On page 4, there's a discussion of a couple of important committees here. One of them is the Community Advisory Board, and I want to read who is involved in this. The City of Regina, of course, is involved, but also the YMCA. They also are the community entity that was chosen by way of an RFP process by the federal government to actually administer the capital, the $5.5 million, not controlled by the City of Regina. The Ministry of Social Services Income Support, the Ministry of Social Services Sask Housing, the Health Region, Mental Health Addictions, Service Canada, Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development, Downtown Browns Emergency Shelter, the First Nations University, Namrud Housing, Salvation Army, and United Way are all part of the group that will actually develop the strategy. And there was a meeting held earlier this year by this group to talk about what that strategy would look like, and I may have a question for a moment on where that strategy sits. But the City of Regina wants to be involved with homelessness in our capacity, but we note, rightly so, that the issue of homelessness is a federal responsibility and is acknowledged by the federal government by the transfer of this money across Canada. And we'll provide resources as we can through our current programming, but our capacity, 8 cents of every dollar of your taxes go toward our services. It makes it difficult for us to be the frontline player in homelessness, but we want to be part of the process. The Homes First strategy is new, relatively new to Canada, certainly new in the discussions within the City of Regina. That essentially is that the first priority for a homeless person is to find them stable accommodation. And once they have that accommodation, we can deal with their issues, be it addictions, mental health issues, whatever it might be. But a stable housing issue, I think, is quite important to stabilize the situation and deal with the person's particular issues. But it's important to note as well that you can't fix what you can't measure. And part of the strategy is to determine the scope and depth of homelessness in our city, because no one really knows that yet. The service providers will be the first to tell you, the frontline workers, that we need to determine the actual numbers. The province says the same thing. So we're a part of a group, a partnership with the federal government, the province, and many community organizations to build this strategy. And our capacity here, as the report talks about, is to provide support as we can through our own programs we use for social housing. Social development being one of those avenues, but we are not taking the front line on this, nor should we be expected to be, and the agreement with the federal government doesn't anticipate or assume provincial or city, I should say, funding in this arrangement. I have a question to the administration, though, on the advisory board, when they met and what was the outcome of those meetings. To you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Carlson?
Yes, Mr. Chairperson, I think I'd look to Ms. Sullivan to respond to that question, please.
The Community Advisory Board is in the process right now of developing the community plan based on the community consultations that were held with the community at the end of January. That information has been used in an application that then goes forward to the federal government for approval. Just last week, the application was completed and is now in the hands of the federal government. They will then review the particular document And once they believe that the document has met the requirements of the program, funds will then be transferred over to Regina to be administered. A call for proposals will be issued to the community after that.
Thank you very much,
Mr.
Mr.
Chair.
Allen.
Another question, any details can the administration provide on what's in that document, that application went to the federal government? What are some of the highlights of it?
The application actually requires the community to make some decisions as to how the community wishes to spend the $1.1 million each year over the next 5 years. So for the first year, we absolutely need to identify whether we're going to be getting into housing first, whether we want to make some capital investments, whether there's some research we want to do, what sort of types of data collection, and what percentage of the overall dollars will be used for those purposes. The good thing about the program is that at the end of each year, the community plan can be revised so that you can make new decisions in your second year. But one of the things that's being proposed in the first year is that some of the money be used to do a count of homelessness in Regina. And also we use some of the money to get a better handle on the capital needs of Regina.
Good, thank you for that. And clearly, comments made by administration are that it's important at the first order of business or near the start is to determine the size and scope of the problem. How many people are we talking about here? That's an important element. Mr. Chair, just a couple of quick comments. There are two funds referenced in the report. One of them is the Social Development Reserve, and the other one is the Social Development Community Investment Grant Program. Both of those programs are involved with housing in some measure. And when this report was at the Housing Commission, there was a discussion of sort of the cost benefit of going into a homelessness strategy and housing first strategy. And some foregone investments where on the one hand we may say that some, given that we're going to be involved more directly with the housing first strategy, that some funds that might otherwise go to, we'll say, social housing and not homelessness, would therefore affect our ability to affect change in social housing. This report asks for a financial upkeep and report back over time as to what that cost benefit is. Doesn't mean that it's right or wrong, but if money is moving away from the Social Development Reserve, away from a housing or a social housing issue or application, but goes to something related to housing first, we need to know what that looks like. Is that the kind of information that we can expect to see from the administration over time? Through you, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Sullivan?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, I'll take that question. Yes, that's correct. What will happen is through our programs, we're keeping track of where our monies are going into what different types of projects. So as we move forward through the allocation of the SDR over the upcoming year, we'll make sure we keep track of the projects just to keep apprised of what types of projects are being funded by the SDR. Right now, the SDR is really just looking at increasing projects for affordable home ownership and rentals, and that's where the program is lying right now. And as part of the comprehensive housing strategy and administration's role, it's to look at trends that are happening. So we will bring forward reports on a quarterly basis on how the funds are being allocated.
Thank you for that. Final comment. Certainly you support the recommendations and ask members of the committee to support it as well. The federal government has stepped up in homelessness. Whether this is enough or not, we'll find out what that looks like in our community over the next 5 years. What they haven't done, of course, is addressed or stepped up with respect to their clear role in social housing and affordable housing across our country. And they don't have a long-term strategy for housing. That is their responsibility. That is the reason why CMHC is actually exists, is to provide that type of support. Aside from homelessness, other areas of need in housing across our country. That's a critical factor. So we're not talking about social housing here. We're talking about homelessness. We're talking about one way to deliver homes for those most in need, That's through Housing First. It's another day for a discussion on their lack of leadership and resources in the budget, not talking at all about social housing. That's a concern for another day. For today, it's homelessness, and to the extent they are at the table nationally, we thank the federal government, but they could always be doing more. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Councilor Murray?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. It's been my fortune since I've been on council to travel extensively across this country, but also down through the U.S. Often I do look at how do other communities handle things? What are they doing? What's happening? Whether it be policing or, in this case, housing, and in this case, homeless. When we think about homelessness, we think about somebody sleeping on a park bench covered with a newspaper, or whatever it is in your mind that you think of as homeless. In Regina, it's pretty difficult to be exposed to the outdoor temperatures for a majority of our year. So what we typically find is it's less about being homeless and more about not having a home or a place, and so you're couch surfing, you're moving from place to place, or trying to find shelter within a building that's not acceptable, whether it's a garage or it's a tent or you're camping or sleeping in your car. You typically have to be inside something because it's far too cold or just inclement weather. That being said, when you jam multiple families together, you have people traveling, sleeping on couches or using a basement floor as a place just to simply get out of the elements, you end up adding more problems, and that becomes evident when you've got multiple families together. That'll last for a little while, and pretty much your domestic calls start going up because people can't get along because they've got issues. And so this does cover a much wider swath than simply just not having a place to live. But for the federal government to step up and give us a long-term plan, I applaud them for that, because we have 5 years of funding. Anything like this is not fixed with a one shot. You can't just, here you go, well, let's put that on the table now, that'll correct that problem. And this is a long-term, ongoing issue. I'm very happy to support this. Do we have all the answers? No. Will we have all the answers when we're finished this? No, we won't. And are we going to get further ahead? Are we going to try to make this a better community? For sure we are. So 100% behind the report. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Murray. Are there any other comments on this matter? Councilor O'Donnell.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I'm clear as to who the other agencies are, but in the report it talks a little bit about a change in delivery of programming. I'm asking for a level of commitment from whether it's the health district or the province or housing and so on, as to whether they're committed to this approach as well, please.
Through you, Mr. Chairman, yes, as far as we know, they are committed to this process.
Mr. Chair, just a follow-up to that, will we be apprised as we get future updates as to their level of engagement on this process and what that means?
Through you, Mr. Chairman, we can do that as part of our reporting process.
I'd be pleased with that, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilor O'Donnell. The Mayor?
Mr. Chair, just to help provide another perspective on the answer, at the Housing Commission we have representatives from Sask Housing, and they spoke very, very pointedly about Housing First, that the government supports it, and that they view this as not even a reallocation of resources, it simply is a targeting of existing resources to support mental health issues, poverty issues, all of which they fund in any case now. So they are absolutely committed to that. I've spoken to Minister Droughty, and she as well has said the same thing, that they are committed to do this. I'm not sure publicly they've said they actually espouse the Housing First strategy, but they do see this as a targeted way to provide existing resources in a more comprehensive way.
Thank you very much. Any further comments? Seeing none, I'll put the question. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your hands. Opposed? Motion carried. Thank you.